In Racing Through Time, we look at the drivers, the cars, the races and the circuits that made motorsport history. Alfa Romeo. Even the name sounds like a racing car. While it's more than 50 years since they dominated World Championship Grand Prix, Alfa have retained their sporting pedigree. Nuvolari, Farina and Fangio are just three of the famous names that helped Alfa Romeo achieve worldwide renown. The racing history of Alfa Romeo is tied in with its rivals on track and in the Italian motor industry. Today, Alfa is part of the Fiat Group and is known as the manufacturer of stylish and sporty vehicles, but their reputation was built on classic racing cars. The four main Italian car companies, Alfa Romeo, Lancia, Maserati and Fiat, have histories extending back to the beginning of the 20th century. Fiat is both the oldest and the largest of the four companies, and now owns the other three. Alfa dominated the 1920s and early 1930s, and again from 1946 to 1951. They were the main force who set the standards in Grand Prix racing. After the 1951 World Championship, they retired from racing, making occasional comebacks in sports cars and briefly in Grand Prix racing in the 1970s and 1980s. Alfa Romeo has played a major part in Racing Through Time. How did the company begin? Anonima Lombarda Fabbrica Automobile, or Alfa, was founded in 1910 in the former Darroch factory in the Portello district of Milan. Although they built about 325 sports models and one Grand Prix car before the 1914-18 World War, Alfa concentrated mostly on aero engine production. During the war, control of Alfa was assumed by Nicola Romeo, an engineer of considerable experience and ability. He added his moniker to create the name Alfa Romeo. Later came the famous four-leaf clover, the Quadrifoglio. Post-war, Alfa continued as a builder of sports cars, but it was one car, the P2, that established their fame. It was designed by the talented Italian engineer Vittorio Jano. The P2 Alfa Romeo featured an 8-cylinder engine of 2 litres. With a Roots-type supercharger, the engine developed 135 brake horsepower. It also had hydraulic brakes and a neat body with a rounded radiator and staggered seating for driver and mechanic. Enzo Ferrari, then an Alfa Romeo employee, persuaded Vittorio Jano to leave Fiat and join Alfa. Jano was probably the most significant figure in Italian automotive engineering over a period of 35 years. During his time at Alfa Romeo, he designed the P2, 1500, 1750, 8C, 8C Monza and Type B Grand Prix models. He then joined Lancia, where he designed the Aurelia and the D50 Grand Prix car. The P2 won most of the major races in 1924. Driven by Campari, it won the French Grand Prix. It would have won again in 1925 had Alfa not withdrawn their cars as a mark of respect for their ace driver, Antonio Ascari. He was killed when his P2 overturned in a ditch when he was leading the race. At the end of 1925, honours were even between Alfa and the French Delage team. There was a World Championship in 1925, which Alfa Romeo won. From then on, a laurel wreath has encircled the company's badge in recognition of this success. As Grand Prix racing for 1926 onwards was limited to cars of 1.5 litres, Alfa Romeo decided not to participate. The Italians retained a passion for true road races like the Targa Florio and the Mille Miglia. The Mille Miglia was the finest road race in the world, held over 1,000 miles of Italian roads from Brescia to Rome and back again. For the 1928 Mille Miglia, Alfa Romeo entered a pair of Jano-designed supercharged 6C 1500s, driven by Campari and Ramponi. Campari drove a fine race and won at an average speed of 80 kilometers an hour. Campari placed second in the Targa Florio. Alfa Romeo had left the company by this stage, and Enzo Ferrari had assumed control of the racing team. In 1929, Campari and Ramponi again won the Mille Miglia. Ramponi with Lorraine won the Double 12 at Brooklands. The very successful record of the 1750 sports cars continued into 1930, when Tazio Nuvolari won the Mille Miglia and the Tourist Trophy at Ards. Here in Ulster, he took on the Mercedes and Bentley opposition on a wet track and won convincingly. 1931 saw the introduction of what was probably Jarno's best all-round design for Alfa Romeo, the outstandingly successful 8C 2300. Its 8-cylinder inline engine was very efficient and powerful, and 3 models were built. 2 road-going versions, the Le Mans and the Mille Miglia, and the out-and-out racers. The first of 4 consecutive Le Mans victories for the 8C 2300 was achieved by Lord Howe and Sir Henry Birkin. Further Le Mans success came in 1932 with Raymond Sommer and Luigi Chinetti. In 1933, Nuvolari and Sommer won, and in 1934, Philippe Itassalin and Chinetti teamed up for Alfa's final win at the French Classic. Returning to 1931, Nuvolari won the Targa Florio, and Alfa 2300s won 9 important races that year. The Italian Grand Prix at Monza in 1931. The 8C 2300 in its Grand Prix racing layout. The car was still a 2-seater, although riding mechanics weren't carried anymore, and the passenger seat was hidden under the fairing. Alfa's 2 top drivers, Giuseppe Campari and Tazio Nuvolari. Campari was a noted opera singer and was planning to retire from racing so he could concentrate on his singing career. Nuvolari, the Lion of Mantua, was the racer of the time. After his P2 had retired, Nuvolari took over Campari's car. The Grand Prix version of the 8C 2300 was named the Monza after this victory, driven by both Nuvolari and Campari. Vittorio Jano looked upon the Monza Alfa Romeo as a compromise because it had a close affinity with the 8C 2300 sports car. In 1932, he produced a true Grand Prix car, the Type B Monoposto, which almost immediately became known as the P3. With its twin supercharged 8-cylinder engine of 2,654 cc's, developing 250 brake horsepower in a slim single-seater chassis, it was capable of over 220 kilometers an hour. Alfa Romeo went from success to success in 1932 as the P3 was virtually unbeatable in Grand Prix racing, with drivers like Nuvolari, Chiron and Caracciola. The 8C 2300 was generally the fastest in sports car racing, winning Le Mans and the Mille Miglia. Everything was going well in 1933 until Alfa Romeo was nationalised by the government. Shortly after, the works announced that it was withdrawing from motor racing. Enzo Ferrari's Scuderia Ferrari was contracted to run Alfa's racing programme. The Scuderia was more autonomous, and the now famous Prancing Horse replaced the Quattrofolio on the official Alfa Romeo team cars. The withdrawal in fact amounted to the retirement of the P3, and Ferrari had to make do with the Monza, and they were now up against stiffer opposition from Bugatti and Maserati with their new 8CM 3000. The 8C 2300 sports cars were still carrying all before them, Nuvolari winning Le Mans with Raymond Sommer and the Mille Miglia with Campari. The 1932 and 33 seasons were the peak years for the Italians, before the arrival of Mercedes-Benz and Auto Union. With the Monza, Alfa suffered reliability problems. Nuvolari moved to the Maserati team during 1933 and won the Belgian Grand Prix, the Coppa Ciano and the Nice Grand Prix, all in the 8cm 3000. Meanwhile, Alfa Romeo, with assistance from Pirelli and concerned by Maserati's success, let the P3s return to the circuits, and they soon started to win again. A terrible day at Monza in 1933 resulted in the deaths of 3 drivers, Campari and Borzacchini, who crashed on the south curve on oil dropped by another car, and Count Zakowski. This was an enormous blow to Italian racing. Alfa had some success in 1934 before the German juggernaut got into gear. The Algerian driver Guy Moll won at Monaco, and Chiron won the French Grand Prix at Montlhéry when the Germans retired. But the driver everyone looked at was Tazio Nuvolari. He liked to sit well back from the wheel, taking corners like a slalom skier, flinging the car, sliding it round in the first of the 4-wheel drifts, with little or no use of the brakes and the car perfectly straight to accelerate out of the corner. Nuvolari was the first to develop this style. The crowd loved his antics and his driving style, which was a complete contrast with his more conventional rival, Achille Varzi. Few other champions have been as versatile as Nuvolari, who could drive anything. He was never discouraged, even if he started the race in an inferior car or in plaster from a previous accident. In 1935, the German team were dominant except for Tazio Nuvolari, who took no notice, defeating the Mercedes in Auto Unions at home and the German Grand Prix at the Nürburgring. As a purely Scuderia Ferrari venture, Luigi Bazzi designed Bimotori cars for racing and record attempts. They had 2 P3 engines, one in front of and one behind the driver. They were prodigiously fast, if a little unreliable, and very difficult to drive. This Bimotori has been restored by Tom Wheatcroft's Donington Museum. It first came to Britain in the 30s. For 1936, Alfa Romeo produced 2 cars, the straight-8 3.8-litre Type 8C35 and the 4-litre V12 12C36. At Monaco, Nuvolari duelled with Rudolf Caracciola, but couldn't hold off the Mercedes. Caracciola in the Mercedes wins at Monaco. Occasionally in a 12C, Nuvolari beat the Germans. Refusing to admit defeat, he won the prestigious Vanderbilt Cup on the Roosevelt Raceway at Long Island in New York. In those days, when you won a cup, you won a cup. These were the last real Grand Prix successes for Alfa Romeo before the Second World War. As the German teams became more dominant, the Italians were outclassed and outfinanced. Adolf Hitler decided to put money into the German teams for propaganda purposes, and the Italians couldn't or wouldn't compete. Either way, Mussolini was unwilling to support them to the same extent. At the end of 1937, Vittorio Jano left Alfa Romeo to join Lancia, being replaced by the more politically acceptable Wilfredo Ricart. For 1938, a number of significant changes had taken place in the Alfa Romeo racing setup. The responsibility for running the works cars was taken away from Ferrari, and now it was the responsibility of chief engineer Ricart. Although 3-litre cars were produced for the 1938 and 1940 Formula One, which stipulated a maximum capacity of 3 litres supercharged and 4.5 litres unsupercharged, the Alfa Romeo directors realised that they had little hope of doing well against the Germans. Their real hopes rested with a new 158 Voiturette. This model was the result of close cooperation between Colombo and Enzo Ferrari, while Ricard, whom Ferrari disliked, had little to do with it. Despite being soundly beaten by the one-off Mercedes W163 in Tripoli, the Alfa had the measure of everything else. In 1938, Alfa Romeo set the standard in racing with their new 158. After some initial clutch problems had been overcome, these cars had a number of victories in Italian races and at the Prix de Bern, won by Farina. The 8-cylinder 1500cc supercharged car originally developed 190 brake horsepower, and this was increased in 1939 to 225. Europe was in disarray after the war, with damaged or destroyed factories across the continent. To get ordinary motorcars back into production was a major feat, and those who wanted to return to motor racing had to tread carefully. The post-war Grand Prix formula was sensible in that it called for 1.5-litre supercharged cars and 4.5-litre unblown ones. The Italians were in the strongest position. The pre-war 158 Alfa Romeo had survived, and the 4CL Maserati was equally ideally suited to the conditions of the day. It was the Tipo 158 Alfa Romeo that was the most significant Grand Prix contender during the period of 1946 to 1951. By sensibly continuing the development of their existing design, Alfa Romeo managed to outpace their rivals. Their straight 8 now produced 310 brake horsepower, giving them the edge. The Alfettas made their first post-war appearance at St. Claude in 1946, driven by Farina and Vermeil. Both retired, the only time the car started and didn't win between 1946 and 1951. Alfa then won the Grand Prix des Nations at Geneva and the Milan Grand Prix. Maseratis, driven by Villaraci and the new rising star, Alberto Ascari, won a number of races, including the Nice Grand Prix. (1948) saw the French driver Jean-Pierre Vermeil winning the French, Italian and Milan Grand Prix and coming second in the Swiss to his teammate Count Trossi. Unfortunately, Achille Varzi had been killed in practice for the Swiss Grand Prix, having returned to racing after the war. Trossi died of cancer during the closed season, and then Vermeil was killed in a minor race in Argentina under suspicious circumstances. With these driver losses, Alfa stopped racing in 1949. 1948 had seen the debut of the Maserati 4CLT, also known as the San Remo because it made a winning debut in the gifted hands of Alberto Ascari. It was run semi-officially by Scuderia Ambrosiana and had a number of victories, including the inaugural British Grand Prix at Silverstone, driven by Luigi Villaraci. The Plate team of 4CLT Maseratis for Baron de Graffenried and Prince Bira at Silverstone in 1949. Bira led for a long time, but de Graffenried won. The Cisitalia, a beautiful and much admired 1100 Fiat engine sports car, nipping at the heels of Alfa Romeo. This wasn't Grand Prix racing, but the Mille Miglia. The race brought back Nuvolari for a memorable swan song. A sick man, he defied adversity and heavy rain to bring the little Cisitalia home in second place. he only lost the race in the last hour, finishing 15 minutes behind the winning Alfa Romeo of Clemente Biondetti. 1949 was a notable year in racing history for two reasons: the debut of the first Grand Prix Ferrari and of Juan Manuel Fangio in his first European season. Fangio's first appearances were impressive. He scored victories at Albi, Marseille, Monza, Perpignan, Pau and San Remo. Fangio's driving of the 4 CLT Maserati was of the highest standard. As a result of these performances, he was signed by Alfa Romeo to drive for them in 1950, when they came back to Grand Prix racing alongside Nino Farina and the veteran Luigi Fagioli. The team were often called the 3 Fs. Enzo Ferrari had always had Grand Prix motor racing uppermost in his mind. Initially, he attempted to challenge his former employers, Alfa Romeo, with a 1.5-litre supercharged car, the 125. Single-stage supercharging was tried first in 1949, and then two-stage supercharging, and the chassis was lengthened to improve the road holding. The 125 was competitive in races in which Alfa Romeo didn't enter. Ascari won the International Trophy at Silverstone and the Swiss and Italian Grand Prix, while Villarace won the Dutch Grand Prix. By 1950, however, Ferrari had begun to realize that the larger, unsupercharged engine was the way to go. The new car was to be built from scratch. Ferrari employed Aurelio Lampredi as his designer and development engineer. The 4.5 had a chain-driven, single-overhead camshaft, 24-valve, 60-degree V12 engine. Originally, it was a 3.3-litre. It was expanded to 4.1 and then the full 4.5. The claimed power output was 380 brake horsepower, making the car only slightly slower than the all-conquering Alfas. But it was a deficit that could be wiped out by the Ferraris needing fewer pit stops for fuel. In 1950, the Grand Prix scene was revitalized with the news that Alfa Romeo had decided to make a comeback, which was to lead to a battle royale between the two great Italian marques, Alfa Romeo and Ferrari, with their differently engined cars. The 1950 season was the inaugural year of the new World Drivers' Championship, and it started with the Grand Prix de Europe at Silverstone. The sun shone on the British royal family as they were presented to the racing drivers. After qualifying, the Alfa Romeos were in first, second, third and fourth position, with British driver Reg Parnell invited to join the team on a one-off basis. Fangio retired with engine trouble, leaving Farina to win from the veteran Fagioli and a delighted Parnell. At Monaco, Fangio won after avoiding the huge pile-up on the first lap, while Farina drove to victory in the Swiss Grand Prix at Bern. Fangio won at Spa and at Reims. The challenge from the big Ferraris began at the Italian Grand Prix, but Farina won after Fangio's car blew up. This victory ensured that Giuseppe Nino Farina became the first world champion driver, with Fangio in second place and Alfa 1-2. Alfa decided not to enter in the final race of the year, the Peña Grand Prix at Barcelona. The result was a Ferrari win in the order of Ascari, Serafini and Taruffi. Reg Parnell and Peter Walker had retired their BRMs in their Grand Prix debut. During the closed season, Alfa Romeo and Ferrari continued to develop their cars, and in 1951, they continued where they'd left off in 1950. Alfa were trying to squeeze the last drops of power from the magnificent straight-8 engine, and they'd now fitted two-stage superchargers and bigger fuel tanks. They experimented with a de Dion rear axle to replace the swing axles, in an effort to transfer as much of their hard-earned power onto the road as possible. In Type 159 form, the engine produced 404 brake horsepower and consumed fuel at the rate of half a kilometre per litre, using a very rich mixture to give better internal cooling. Even with a full 295-litre tank, 2 or more pit stops would be needed to complete a full Grand Prix distance. Ferrari, meanwhile, had developed a new 24-plug cylinder head for their 4.5-litre. Despite this, he withdrew his entry from the Silverstone International Trophy at the last moment, but Prancing Horse honour was upheld by Reg Parnell in the Thin Wall Special, a modified 4.5-litre car. In the first heat, Fangio ran out the winner, but Parnell had driven a fine race to finish second. The second heat went to Farina's Alfa from teammate Sanisi at a faster pace. The final was eagerly awaited, with the prospect of a battle between Farina, Fangio and Parnell. As the cars were wheeled out against the backdrop of threatening clouds, it started to rain with that devastating suddenness for which Silverstone is now infamous. The course was flooded with rain and hail, and the darkness was lit up by lightning. Visibility for the drivers was nil, and cars were going off in all directions. Bonetto led for Alfa on the first lap, but was passed by Parnell and Duncan Hamilton's Talbot. Fangio had worked his way up to third when the race was stopped after 5 laps, with Reg Parnell declared the winner. Conditions were no better at the Swiss Grand Prix at Bern. Fangio made the most of the conditions, leading throughout. Then, at the Belgian Grand Prix at Spa, Farina, inspired by a recent victory at Dundrod, was in tremendous form. Villaraci took the lead for Ferrari, but Farina soon passed him and went on to win, with Ascari second and Villaraci third. Round 4 of the 1951 world title was at Reims in the Champagne district of France, and battle was rejoined between Alfa Romeo and Ferrari. Fangio and Ascari both made good starts and battled for the lead, but both retired in the early stages, so Fangio took over Fagioli's car and Ascari the car of Gonzalez, and Farina was forced to retire. Eventually, Fangio took the lead to win from Ascari and Villaraci. The French Grand Prix was the beginning of the end for Alfa. They might still be faster and have better brakes, but their extra need for pit stops for fuel was a distinct disadvantage. On the slower circuits, there was every chance that they would not be able to make up the time to allow for this. The 1951 British Grand Prix at Silverstone would prove the point. The Silverstone crowds waited to see if the Ferraris could beat Alfa Romeo, and BRM chose this race to make one of their rare appearances. They were to be overshadowed, however, by the efforts of Ferrari driver Gonzalez. He caused a sensation in practice and caused banner headlines in the Daily Express newspaper when he set the first 100-mile-an-hour lap. In the race, Gonzalez swept into the lead, charging round the circuit in an immense power slide, and soon pulled out a 5-second advantage over Fangio. Fangio was driving with tremendous purpose and pulled out that little bit extra. He overtook Gonzalez to lead by a length. The BRMs, driven by Reg Parnell and Peter Walker, were running reliably, but the drivers were being fried, their feet getting badly burnt by heat from the 16-cylinder engines. Gonzalez retook Fangio, who came into the pits for fuel, leaving Gonzalez well in the lead. Fangio moved back up to second place, but try as he might, he couldn't catch the Ferrari, with Villaraci third, Bonetto fourth, Reg Parnell fifth and Peter Walker seventh. A delighted Froilan Gonzalez receives the winner's garland. He had outdriven Fangio on the day. A fortnight later, it was the German Grand Prix on the formidable Nürburgring. Ascari was fastest in practice from the irrepressible Gonzalez, with Fangio third. At the start, Fangio fought it out with Ascari and Gonzalez, both of whom passed Fangio when he stopped for fuel. Fangio fought back to retake the lead before having to make his second stop. When he returned to the fray, he had gearbox problems and couldn't catch Ascari, having to be content with second place, and Gonzalez finished third. Before the 1951 Italian Grand Prix, Fangio led the World Championship with 27 points, from Ascari on 17, and Farina and Gonzalez both on 15 points. Alfa entered 4 cars for Fangio, Farina, Bonetto and Emmanuel de Graffenried, while Ferrari had entered 5 cars for Ascari, Villaraci, Gonzalez, Piero Taruffi and the Brazilian Chico Landi. Fangio and Farina were fastest in practice. At the start, Fangio shot to the front until he lost a tyre tread and had to pit. This let Ascari into a lead which he was never to lose. Farina took over Bonetto's car while Fangio retired. Farina caught Gonzalez for third, only to lose it again at his second pit stop. Ascari, meanwhile, had a shambolic pit stop of his own, leaving the pit in disarray. Farina again caught up with Gonzalez, only to have to stop again with a split fuel tank. He flew out of the pits with fuel streaming along the road behind him. A weary Alberto Ascari won for Ferrari, followed by Gonzalez and Villaraci. A disappointed Farina was fourth. The World Championship was decided at the last round, the Spanish Grand Prix, and the race was over 70 laps, 375 kilometers. The Alfas planned 2 pit stops and used smaller tanks to improve the car's road holding. Ferrari decided to change tyres, using a smaller diameter wheel and larger section tyre, and this was to prove a costly error. Ascari led from the start until Fangio made his bid, caught and passed him. This led to a flat-out battle at terrific speeds, both drivers within centimetres of the wall and rows of spectators. All good things must come to an end, and all of the Ferrari drivers were afflicted with tyre problems. Only Gonzalez made any real impact on the race. He passed Farina for second place, but was unable to catch Fangio. Later, Gonzalez was heard to say, "I'm satisfied to finish second. Fangio is the master." So, Fangio won his first title with 31 points, from Ascari with 25 and Gonzalez with 24. After this tremendous season, what would 1952 be like? During the winter of 1951-1952, the future of Grand Prix racing was being assessed. Would Alfa Romeo continue? Would Mercedes-Benz return to racing with their pre-war W168 V8 supercharged car? Would the BRM be reliable, and would it turn up if it was entered? The race organisers were in a difficult position at the start of the season, with Alfa finally announcing their withdrawal from motor racing. They'd achieved all that they could hope for, and knew that it would be very difficult to improve the cars any further to take on Ferrari. So, one by one, the Grand Prix organisers went over to Formula 2, and eventually the organising body followed suit. Fangio's win in Barcelona in 1951 was the last win for a forced induction car until the advent of the turbocharged era of the 1980s. From its debut in 1938 until its final race in 1951, the Alfetta was one of the most successful racing cars ever built. Willie Green is one of the best-known historic racing car drivers, and he had the opportunity to drive this privately owned Alfa Romeo at Goodwood.
It's beautiful, it sounds incredible, and when you get to drive it, it's even better. You can do anything you like with the car. You can play it on the throttle. The steering wheel is very nearly redundant. I mean, it is just perfect. I love it. It's my favourite motor car.
Alfa Romeo's preoccupation with Formula One had loosened their grip on the Mille Miglia. Since its very inception, this had been the place where Alfa had excelled. Back in the great days of Varzi and Nuvolari and throughout the 30s, the only driver to break the Italian domination was Rudolf Caracciola in a Mercedes-Benz. Britain's Jaguar and Healey, with Aston Martin, challenged the new king of the Mille Miglia, Ferrari. The Mille Miglia was a race the likes of which will never be seen again. A continuous town-to-town race, a direct descendant of the great city-to-city races, which were the birth of motor racing at the turn of the century. Rumours began to abound in Italy of a new Alfa Romeo being developed for sports car racing by Consalvo Sanesi. The Disco Volante was a reality. First held in 1927, it was the inspiration of 4 Italian enthusiasts: Count Amo Maggi, Franco Marzotti, Giovanni Canestrini and Renzo Castagneto. They devised the grand concept of a race around Italy. From Brescia in the north to Rome in the south and back, the distance was conveniently 1,000 miles. Count Amo Maggi was the patron and driving force behind the race. (1953) was one of the great years for sports car racing, with the involvement of most of the major sports car constructors. The course was altered little over the years, remaining essentially a big loop. From Brescia in the north to Rome in the south and back, the distance was conveniently 1,000 miles. The Aston Martin team stayed at Casa Maggi, where life is pleasant and almost feudal in style. Following the team's renaissance in 1952, 3 DB3s were entered for Reg Parnell, George Abacassis and Peter Collins, a blend of youth and experience. Alfa Romeo had entered their Disco Volante coupes for Fangio, Carl Kling and Consalvo Sanesi. With their powerful 3.6-litre 6-cylinder engines and independent suspension, they were highly regarded. Lancia entered 4 of their new 3000cc coupes to be driven by Taruffi, Biondetti, Bonetto and Umberto Maggioli. Double overhead camshaft V6 engines developed 200 horsepower. Ferrari fielded a vast team which included Farina, Villaraci, the Marzotto brothers, Castellotti, the American Tom Cole and the British driver Mike Hawthorne. Altogether, 26 Ferraris were entered. The works cars used either the 4.1 or 3-litre V12 engines. As Stirling Moss leaves the line in the Jaguar, the crowd prepares to cheer on the Lancias, Ferraris, Alfas and Maseratis. The 1953 Mille Miglia had all the ingredients of a great race. The early retirements of Luigi Villaraci and Farina dented Ferrari's hopes. Both were battling with Consalvo Sanesi's Alfa Romeo in the early stages of the race until Villaraci stopped with brake problems. Sanaisi's performance was masterly, leading at record speed in Verona and Ravenna and reaching Pescara, 394 miles from Brescia, at an average of 110 miles an hour. He'd been nominated by the communist unions to drive for Alfa Romeo, but unfortunately had to retire from the race shortly afterwards. Farina then led for a short while before leaving the road at L'Aquila. This left Kling in the lead at Rome at an average of 97 miles an hour from Fangio and Giannino Marzotto. Jaguar's Mille Miglia was a disaster. In each case, the effects of the rough roads on the non-independent rear suspension meant that all three cars retired. Aston Martin started off well, all three cars passing through the refuelling stop at Ravenna. Collins, 12th at Pescara, had taken 4 places by the time he reached Rome. Meanwhile, Kling, who had led for Alfa Romeo at Rome, crashed on the mountain pass between Rome and Siena. This let Fangio into the lead from Giannino Marzotto's Ferrari. But while crossing the Apennines, the steering on Fangio's car began to fail. A damaged track rod meant that he only had steering on one front wheel. Marzotto went into the lead, which he was to hold to the end of the race. That Fangio was able to finish second was remarkable, only 12 minutes behind after 1,000 miles. Aside from their national aspirations, the international capabilities of a major motor manufacturer were now being shop-windowed through the Le Mans 24-hour race. Jaguar's interest in the race, becoming winners of it for the first time in 1951, attracted much attention, particularly in the United States. This is an important export market for Alfa Romeo, so this was seen as an important venue for Alfa in which to succeed. The Disco Volante had been intended to do just that. It was entered in the 1953 race, but the car fell by the wayside. That effectively brought about the end of Alfa Romeo in sports car racing. Alfa Romeo became a major manufacturer and concentrated on building road cars with a sporting flavour rather than outright sports cars as they had done in the 1920s and 30s. Alfa confined their racing to touring cars and GT races in the 1960s. This is the 1965 Sandown 6-hour endurance race.
This time the 2 offside tyres are changed, brake pads inspected and fuel added. Mildren takes off the relief driver sticker. The drivers compare notes. Gardner is in and away in 150. At 5 hours, the TI is first by 6 laps, and car 31 is 1 lap ahead of the Moffat-Palmer Lotus. But the passing hours and the pace is being felt by a lot of cars. For many of the bigger cars, handling has become a problem. With their brakes worn to metal, they're overshooting the corners. Many have changed brake pads and linings. The Reed Stewart Triumph 2000 is blowing smoke and sounding sick, but some people seem to have lost interest in the race. 3 minutes to go and the TI seems late. Glen Abbey looks back up the straight. But here he is, and a relieved Mildren gives the last pit signal. Mildren checks with the timekeepers just to make sure. But it's 5 o'clock, and the checkered flag is out waiting for Gardner and the TI. Frank Gardner crosses the line 6 hours, 1 minute, 1.2 seconds, and 462 miles after he left the grid. Now the strain is off the Mildren pit. Gardner and Bartlett average 77 miles an hour for the 6 hours.
A victory for Frank Gardner and Kevin Bartlett in the Giulia TI.
Now the laurels of victory. For Gardner and Bartlett, a well-deserved win. The TI, Old Faithful, has won for the 2nd year in succession.
The 2-litre GTV was a major force in the early days of the European Touring Car Championship. It was this success that encouraged Alfa to come back to sports car racing. Once more, they formed a works team, and the T33 Alfa eventually proved successful in the World Sports Car Championship. Full works participation saw them win the championship, albeit after the departure of Porsche. By now, Formula One had changed greatly from 1951, and Alfa decided they needed to return. At first, they provided an engine for March, and surprisingly, a deal was done to replace the Cosworth engine in the back of Bernie Eccleston's Brabhams. Eccleston had bought the company from Ron Turenak and was seeking to have first call on a factory engine. Although the BT46 was fast, it wasn't always terribly reliable. Drivers John Watson and Hunt Stuck were initially able to give a good account of themselves, and Watson nearly won the British Grand Prix in 1976, but victory eventually went to James Hunt. The writing was on the wall for Niki Lauda at Ferrari, so he joined Brabham for 1978, and this was after his second World Championship for Ferrari in 1977. Brabham's designer was a young South African, Gordon Murray, and he was studying the development of ground effect cars. Colin Chapman, with Peter Wright, had designed the first ground effect car. It was an extremely effective design, but over in America there was an alternative developed by Jim Hall, the Chaparral, in 1970. This required a second engine to provide the ground effect suction at the back of the car. It was studied carefully by Gordon Murray, who designed a Formula One car using the same principles. A lack of time was a problem, but it was the loss of the driver Carlos Pache in an aeroplane accident which placed the team under pressure. The arrival of Niki Lauda was a welcome boost to the team. The car made its debut in the Swedish Grand Prix at Understorp. The BT46B was immediately successful, fast in practice and showing the way round to the opposition. At the start, the Brabham was closely followed by Mario Andretti's Lotus. There was a problem which no one had thought of. The fans in the Brabham scattered stones and rubber over the whole of the circuit. Many of the other competitors complained, so although the car won the race, it was something of a Pyrrhic victory. After the race, representations were made to the governing body of motorsport, and the Brabham fan car was consigned to the museum. Brabham continued to challenge for World Championship honours during the year with a more conventional car. There was one more important victory for the Alfa Romeo Brabham team. This was at Monza in 1978. But it was to be a sad event. The death of the Swedish driver Ronnie Peterson followed this fiery accident at the start. The race was stopped. From the restart, the Brabham Alfa was dominant and it went on to win the Italian Grand Prix. Under any other circumstances, this would have been a very popular victory for Niki Lauda, but John Watson finished second. There was just one more win for the Brabham Alfa Romeo team at Imola. After this, a parting of the ways came about, and Eccleston decided that turbocharging was the way to go, and turned to the 1.5-litre BMW turbo engine. Meanwhile, Alfa Romeo had decided to go it alone with their own Grand Prix car. This didn't prove to be as successful as Alfa Romeo would have hoped, and while they came close, they weren't able to win a race. Alfa withdrew from Grand Prix racing at the end of 1985, but their link with motor racing has never really stopped. In the early 1990s, an Alfa Romeo team decided that the German Touring Car Championship was the ideal showroom for their saloon cars. The DTM cars were high-tech four-wheel drive cars that competed initially in Germany, and then the series spread right across Europe. Alfa had success in 1993 when Nicola Larini won the championship in the 155 V6 Ti. Since then, Alfa Romeo have competed successfully in 2-litre Super Touring and most recently in the European Touring Car Championship. With Fiat now the owners of Alfa Romeo, Maserati and Ferrari, it's unlikely that they will ever again compete against each other in Grand Prix racing. However, the name Alfa Romeo will always have a romance and a special place in the hearts of enthusiasts around the world.